Good morning and welcome to worship at North Bethesda United Methodist Church. My name is Reverend Kara and we're glad to be on this journey with you. Today is Sunday, October 23rd. If you're watching and it's before 4 p.m., make a note to come out and join us for a Blessing of the Pets service that'll be held outside on our front lawn. All people are welcome, all animals, creatures of any kind. Bring them on for a short service of song and prayer and blessing. We also hope you'll join us in just a couple of weeks on November 5th. We have our All Saints service, and that's a Sunday where we come together to remember, to celebrate the life of, and to share in our own grief as we miss the people who are no longer with us, who've died in the last year. If you have someone that you would like us to remember by lighting a candle in our church on that Sunday and saying their name out loud, please send their name to me so we can get it to the church office and into the bulletin in our service that day. There are lots of ways that you can become more a part of our church family, ways that you can grow in faith and in love of God and service to neighbor. I hope you'll stick around and get to know us because we're so glad that you're here. Welcome to church.
My reading today is from the New International Version of the Bible. This is John 21st chapter, verses 1 through 17. Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep."
Here's a question. How do your friends or family know it's you when they see you from a ways away? Or if they hear your voice on the phone or get something from you in the mail? What are your trademarks? I was walking in Rock Creek Park last Friday morning, and from pretty far away on Beach Drive, I see this older man running toward me in a fluorescent neon green jacket. And from that far away, I can only see his gait and his jacket, but I 100% know that that man is my dad. It is a random Friday. There are hundreds of thousands of people in this city, but I know beyond a doubt that it's him. Who can you recognize from far away and why? Or whose handwriting do you have memorized? I saw a letter in my church mailbox with my name written in this beautiful script on the envelope, and I knew immediately that my friend Carol Ann had sent that letter. Or maybe there's someone whose speaking voice you could pick out in a crowd. Or you could do a taste test of like 5 different chocolate chip cookies, and you'd know without a doubt which one was made by your aunt. We all have particular trademarks, ways that we recognize people, ways that others know it's us. So my follow-up question is, if Jesus was here as a flesh and bones person today, how would we know it was him? What are his trademarks? What would we see or taste or hear or feel and know beyond the shadow of a doubt? Yes, that is Christ. Our gospel story today is from the collection of post-Easter stories, post-resurrection stories in the gospel. And this question was pretty relevant to the disciples. Jesus was crucified and buried, right? And now there are these rumors that he's walking around again. How will they recognize him? How will they know that it's him? In Luke, remember, there's this story of a post-resurrection communion meal at Emmaus, where Jesus blesses and breaks bread, and it says the disciples' eyes were opened, and they knew it was him. In John, Jesus says Mary's name in the garden on Easter morning, and suddenly she knows. A bit later that day, and then also again the following week for Thomas's sake, Jesus offers his wounded hands and side to the disciples to touch so that they can know. People recognize Christ by his scars, by his voice, in the breaking of the bread. Trademark Jesus things. And today's story offers us another way that the risen Christ is made recognizable. We're in our 4th and final boat story for the stewardship season here, John chapter 21. As the story opens, it's been a little while since Easter, and the disciples are pretty aimless again. They don't know what to do. And because when we don't know what to do, we kind of autopilot ourselves. They're sitting there at the Sea of Tiberias, and Peter says, "Well, I'm going fishing. I'm just going to do the thing that I've been doing my whole life." And the others are like, "I guess we'll come too." But fishing doesn't go so well. All night they work, they keep going through the motions, and nothing comes from it. And in the wee hours of the morning, Jesus appears on the shore, but they don't know it's him. They probably assume it's someone who wants to buy their fish to take them to market, or just a nosy bystander who says, "Have you no fish?" And they shout back, "No, nothing. We've got nothing. We've been at this all night and have nothing to show for it." And this stranger on the beach gives them a tip. "Cast your nets on the other side of the boat." So they do, and suddenly their nets are so full they can't even haul them in. Suddenly, everything is flipped. The listlessness and aimlessness of not knowing what to do, the fruitlessness of hours spent working with nothing to show for it, it is all reversed. It is transformed into this sudden abundance. And the disciples know in that exact moment, they know who that guy on the beach is. Verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." The trademark Jesus thing, the bright neon jacket of this story, is abundance. Unexpected, unexplainable. There are so many fish they can't haul them in. Just a minute ago, they were afraid of going bankrupt, but now there are so many fish that they're going to have to find other people to eat them. Have you ever had an unexpected abundance of something? Maybe you're like Jesse Jennings in our church, and you've had these amazing cherry tomatoes in your garden this year, and they just kept growing and growing and growing. Or you're like my neighbor, who thought that he had ordered 5 bananas from the grocery store service, but he ended up with 5 bunches of bananas. Or maybe there's a fluke, or someone has to cancel, and you suddenly have 4 extra tickets to a concert for tomorrow night. What happens when there's abundance like that? You give it away, right? You call and you call until you find someone who can use your concert tickets. Or my neighbor knocks on the doors until all the bananas find a new home. Jesse brings these cherry tomatoes to church this summer, and my whole week is made. There's a huge surplus of something, and our usual proclivity to hoard or to hide or to keep it to ourselves gets overridden by this genuine impulse to be generous. Abundance is like this signal for our generosity to kick in. It brings out the best in us, the God image in us. The hard part is, we don't live in a world, especially right now, we don't live in a world that talks about abundance much. We aren't socialized to see it. Instead, we live in shortage land. I did a quick brainstorm of all the shortages I recall reading about in the news this week or recently. See how your list compares with mine. There's an Adderall shortage that's preventing people, especially children with ADHD, from getting what they need to function well. The infant formula shortage continues. There's a butter shortage, 22% less butter in storage this year than last year as we head into the holidays. Alaskan crab season is canceled this year. There's a labor shortage, a childcare shortage, a housing shortage. Groceries are noticeably more expensive, so is travel, so are utilities. We absolutely live in shortage land. But here's the thing. I think we've always lived there. No matter the decade or the century, no matter the location on this planet, the message of scarcity that we hear and internalize has not actually been correlated to any exceptional circumstances. We've just been immersed in the idea that everything is scarce and finite, or could become so at any minute, and if we don't hustle for our fair share and hold on to it, we'll end up without. Right? I read about the butter shortage this week, and even as I wrote this sermon about abundance, I was making a mental note. Better go stock up on butter. when there's a real or perceived scarcity of something specific, our default familiar action is to scramble, to snatch up everything we see, because you never know if you actually have enough, so better to just grab one more. Our hoarding behavior is made worse in certain circumstances, but it is well practiced and part of our mindset, whether gas is $2.50 or $4 a gallon. Hoarding and sensing scarcity is well practiced and part of our mindset, whether we are making $65,000 per year and thus in the top 1% of richest people in the world or not. And so while I recognize that there are real-time shortages in all the ways I listed just a minute ago, I also want to hold that our scarcity mentality exists independently of all of that. It is as old as the Bible, and it seems to be exactly what God wants to pull us out from. All the way back to the manna in the desert in Exodus, right? Only take what you need. Any extra manna you gather to try to store up is going to spoil. Trust that more will come tomorrow. There are stories in the Bible of the oil that doesn't run out, of the tiny amount of yeast that leavens the whole loaf, of water turned to wine for the whole wedding, thousands of people fed when a few people offer up the bread and the fish that they have. The trademark of Jesus is abundance. The trademark of God's kingdom is abundance. There's a poem called The Sandalwood Tree by Hafez, the Persian poet from the 1300s. In case you need a refresher like I did, a sandalwood tree is known for its beautiful floral scent. It's remarkable because even if the tree is chopped down and used for wood, it holds on to the scent for decades. It's the most expensive wood in the world. Anyway, listen to this poem. The sandalwood tree shares its lovely scent with any who come near. God is like that. Does the tree ever think to itself, I'm not going to offer my fragrance to that man over there because of what he did last night, or to that woman who neglected her child, or because of what we might have ever done? It is not the way of God to hoard. God is simply just there, emanating freely what God is, if we wish to grab a handful or fill a basket in the eye. It is not the way of God to hoard. God is a beautiful, generous tree. God is a spring of fresh, new water coming out continuously in the desert. God is a friend cooking fish on the beach when we feel like failures with our empty nets. God invites us to participate in abundance because, like we've already said about the tomatoes and the bananas and the concert tickets and the fish, when we do perceive it, it makes us generous. Perceiving abundance snaps us out of being miserly hermits who only think about ourselves, and it invites us to the fullness of life that God made us for. Think about the example of time. When I think I have an abundance of time, I am a much nicer person, right? If it's one of those days when I have to leave one thing early and I show up late to the next and the whole day just goes like that, and I know that I'm going to be up working long past my bedtime, if that's my sense of time, then when a stranger tries to stop me on the street, I don't even see them. I have no patience for whatever they want to say. Or I rush the child that I'm trying to get out the door for school. My perceived scarcity of time, however real that perception is, makes me quite ungenerous. But if I'm on vacation, or if I've just carved off a single day, one day off for myself, time feels more abundant. And if a stranger on the street that day wants to ask me something, I'm a lot more likely to stop, and maybe they want to know how to get somewhere and I can help them. Or maybe they'll tell me a delightful story that reminds me of someone that I miss. Or maybe I'll not rush the child out the door and will instead marvel at how this 3-year-old really can tie his own shoes if he's given the time. Or maybe this child, no longer rushed by me, will point to the clouds at sunset, and I'll take the time to notice how much I miss when I act like my time is scarce and no one deserves any of it, not even the sky. How much we miss, too, when we act as though our money is scarce and no one deserves any of it, not even God. How much joyful, generous living we miss out on. So how do we get there to abundance? The world is going to be the world, right? Our schedules, our bank accounts, the economy, our lives are going to be more or less what they are. But if a scarcity mentality is at least partially divorced from the objective circumstances, if we're made to feel like we don't have enough, even if we're richer than 99% of the world, if that way of thinking and hoarding and being afraid isn't as connected to our specific situations as we think it is, then maybe believing and practicing abundance isn't as circumstantially dependent as we think it is either. Maybe we have the ability to choose, to practice abundance, even in times like these. One tiny bit of hope I have from trying to practice this just this week is I found that a sense of abundance can spill over from one category of my life to another. If I move through my day and realize, for example, how this season in DC is exquisite, with the colors of fall, the leaves just at their peak, a wealth of beauty around me, and I revel in that abundance of beauty, I really am more apt to be generous in another area of my life. Or if I spend just like 5 or 10 minutes maybe looking at photos on my phone or thinking and realizing that, wow, I have an abundance of really good friends. I have no idea where these incredible people in my life came from. My nets are breaking, and I am so grateful. The longer that I can operate from that place, the more I believe in abundance in other places. And then the fact that cereal is $5 a box doesn't stop me from buying a few extra boxes for Bethesda Help, because truly I can afford that. When we are practicing recognizing abundance and we find it easily in one category, the generous living can spread to others. Jesus invites his disciples to participate in abundance. This has been his message all along, but he hits it home one more time before he sends them out. After Easter, he gifts them with this unexpectedly huge haul of fish, an abundance that points immediately to possibility, to a compulsion to be generous. And then he pulls Simon Peter aside and he says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." "Feed my lambs." A second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Tend my sheep." A third time, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep." Simon Peter has been invited to this great feast, reminded of all of the possibilities. He has been forgiven and empowered, and now Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" Yes? Here is an actionable response to that love. Feed someone else. What will you do as a result of your love for Jesus, of your own forgiveness, of this abundance? What will I do as someone who has truly an embarrassment of riches in connections, in friendships, in food, in income, in education? As someone who has been forgiven and excused and given chance after chance after chance, feed, Jesus says, tend, feed. This is making our love, as Wendell Berry puts it, making our love an economic practice. Today begins our second week this year, providing dinners for the guests and staff at the Interfaith Women's Shelter. Do we have the capacity to do more next year? I think yes. We had one joy-filled day, packing more than 10,000 meals in May to send abroad through Rise Against Hunger. I believe we could do that at least twice next year. Do you love me? Jesus asks. Feed my sheep. Tend. We joined the New Neighbors Faith Alliance to support Afghan refugee families this year. We filled backpacks for 12 middle schoolers and helped break down stigma and cost barriers to get 4 young people who needed it into quality therapy. There's more to do. Feed my sheep. We are surrounded by abundance. We have a wealth of knowledge and experience in this church. We have neighbors in abundance. Do you remember the outpouring of cards and gifts, flowers left on the doorstep, checks from strangers when our church was vandalized this summer? People came out of the woodwork. More than enough people showed up to clean up. We ended up with far more money than we needed to cover the cost of the damage. And the kind words of our neighbors of every faith and no faith just kept coming. Or have you noticed that painting in our hallway? A neighbor of the church who was moved by our front lawn witness after the school shooting in Uvalde painted and gifted his work to our church. We have a surplus of neighbors, of opportunities to witness to people, to do something that affects hearts and lives. We have abundant financial resources in this church, in this community of folks participating in person and online. A true tithe, 10% from everyone who considers themselves part of our church, would add up to more than enough to fund our current ministries and start something new. In fact, I'll let you know now that we were awarded a renewal grant from the Lilly Foundation for 2023. It's a clergy renewal grant, which means I'll be taking funded time away for a few months next year. And while I'm gone, you all have $15,000 to bring in some really phenomenal preachers and community leaders and small group facilitators to offer renewal to your own spirits and to spark ideas, dream about how to extend God's welcome with even more intentionality and enthusiasm. We're going to use some of that money to send our youth on a retreat, some of it to send the rest of us on a retreat. Anyone who wants to come for a weekend after I return, to be in one another's presence, share what we've learned, and dream about our next steps together. There are so many good things ahead, people. The fish are everywhere. The nets are overflowing. We have been invited to God's great Easter party to live into this abundance with radical generosity so that others will look at us, will look at this beautiful congregation and what we are doing, and they will immediately recognize that trademark of Christ right here, alive and well. Thanks be to God. Amen.
despair? Who will lift the olive branches? Who will light the flame of care? God of rainbow, fiery pillar, leading where the eagles soar. We, your people, ours the journey, now and ever, now and ever, now and evermore. As we stand, a world divided by our own self-seeking schemes, grant that we, your global village, might envision wider dreams. God of rainbow, fiery pillar, leading where the eagles soar. We, your people, ours the journey, now and ever, now and ever, now and evermore. Should the threats of dire predictions